And staff, if you all could let me know when your presenter is here.
Thank you, Leah. Josh is trying to get on right now, so we should resolve that shortly. Thank you for your patience.
All right, well then I will go ahead and get started. Samantha, are we streaming?
No.
If not, you can start that.
Here's Josh.
All righty. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Leah LaRue, and I am the Assistant Director of Neighborhood Planning for the City of Atlanta's Department of City Planning. I'm very, very happy to have you all with us here tonight. Welcome to WB, that's Web-Based 1008, our neighborhood planning series, Atlanta City Design Housing. We are not streaming this class live on Facebook, but we are recording it and we'll upload it to our website at the end of the class. I always like to remind people, although we've all been at this for almost a year now, I do like to remind people that we are at the mercy of technology. And so I ask for your patience, ask you to please be patient with us in the event of any technical difficulties or loss of sound or video or audio or anything like that. Please just bear with us as we try to repair any technology gaps that we may experience. We ask that everyone keep their microphones muted, as with all of our NPU University courses, unless an instructor advises otherwise. If you haven't already grabbed a notebook or pen, this is a good time to grab something to take notes with. And of course, we will move into, I think the next slide, Samantha. Yeah, I'm not used to not having the presentation on my end so that I could control it. No? Okay, there we go. Thank you. Excuse me. So please keep your microphones muted. Of course, you can use reactions to clap or give a thumbs up if you hear something that particularly moves you to react. And if you have a question or comment during Q&A or at any appropriate time, you can raise your hand to get into the queue. And as with all of our NPU University courses, all questions must be relevant to course content. This event is a little bit different, and so there may be other opportunities for interaction. Just follow whatever the instructors say and you'll be just fine. A little bit about NPU University for those of you that are joining us for the first time, and of course a hearty welcome back to those of you who have attended our courses before. It's always good to see the familiar faces, and it's even better to see new faces. So welcome again. NPU University was established at the beginning of 2020 with the intention of hosting in-person classes that would benefit residents and community stakeholders and empower them to impact their neighborhoods and their communities. We started these courses in person with the intention of moving them around from venue to venue all across the city. Very early on, residents asked if we could residents asked if we could conduct these classes virtually. We thought that was a great idea, but we thought it was a little too big an idea for that time, considering we have a very small team of just 4. And we wanted to perfect the program a little bit before we try to do anything different with it. Of course, COVID-19 had something different in mind for us. And within just a couple of months, we were scrambling to figure out how we could indeed produce this entire program onto a virtual platform. So here we are. We have thus far presented over 20 courses for over 1,000, I think close to 2,000 participants. Just today, we announced our spring 2021 cohort of the Community Leadership Institute of Atlanta, which is a certificate program that we offer in conjunction with the University of Georgia. For information about any of our other courses, whether past, present, or future, you can visit our website at www.npuatlanta.org. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to Samantha Terry, who is our NPU program manager and the NPU University registrar. She'll drop her contact information in the chat. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to her. At this time, I like to introduce, typically I introduce our team, and I think the only person from our team that's here tonight, the rest of our team is doing other public meetings tonight, but we have Samantha Terry here, who, as I mentioned, is the program manager for program manager for NPU University and for the neighborhood planning units. And then I'm really happy to have tonight my colleagues and presenters, Joshua Humphreys, who is the director of the Office of Housing and Community Development, and I'll let him introduce his team. Josh?
Great. Thanks so much, Leah, for helping put this together. We're excited to get to do an NPU event about Atlanta State Design Housing tonight. So it's been a long time coming, coordinating this. So excited to see this happen. Tonight, there's a few folks on the team I want to kind of spotlight, and we'll do some breakout rooms and have conversation, and several of them are going to be leading some of them, so you'll get a chance to chat with them specifically. Chanel Zeisel is our assistant director from our office. She's joining us tonight. Kendra Taylor and Carolina Rodriguez are both project managers on our team in the Office of Housing and Community Development. And then Sonia Sequeira is a community engagement manager with the Office of Design in the Department of State Planning, and she's been doing a lot of community public engagement work for the rollout of Atlanta State Design Housing. So she played a big role in helping make this happen and the other events related to this around the rollout of this project. So I want to jump right into just general layout for how tonight's going to work to get everybody kind of some expectations for it. So I'm going to do a presentation to start things off, 20, 25 minutes or so, walking through the project at a high level for anyone who's relatively new to it. And then we're going to break into a couple of rounds of breakout sessions. We'll have 4 of them, and I'll describe them when we get closer to it of what they're going to be, but we'll do 2 rounds of that. So each of you can pick 2 different breakout rooms to join and have conversation. And our real purpose for those is that, included in here are kind of policy related proposals. A lot of them are zoning, land use oriented around housing policy. And these rooms are going to, we hope to be places where we can get feedback from you about what you like, what you don't like, and what you want to make sure you see as we move forward with the actual drafting of the legislation related to these proposals. And then at the end, we'll come back together, and the facilitators for those groups will talk a bit through what was talked about in the breakout session. And then hopefully we'll wrap up somewhere around 7:30 is our goal, as long as we don't get too long-winded. So with that, I'm going to jump in and go ahead and share my screen, and we'll do first walk through the presentation. Any questions before we get started, or any last words from you, Leah, or anyone, or Samantha? Okay, cool. All right. So the purpose of this project is to do a few things. Is the reason that we started down this road. One is to assess the current state of housing in Atlanta, and affordable housing is the focus, but just the general housing ecosystem and what's working and what's not working in the city. To research the history of housing policy in Atlanta and the role that history plays on the current challenges that we have today. And then to propose Atlanta-specific solutions to the Atlanta-specific problems we have, and think critically about how we build a city that is more inclusive and creates housing opportunities across the income spectrum for anyone that wants to call Atlanta home as the city continues to grow. So this project actually began around 2018. In the summer of 2018, summer or fall of 2018, we held a series of public events called the Equitable Housing Needs Assessment at the time. And these events were focused on really asking residents of the city, and some of you on the call may have joined us for these, asking residents of the city, like, what are the core challenges that you're experiencing personally and observing in the housing market in Atlanta, and then what types of proposals and what do you hope to get out of any kind of changes in the way that the city works and related to housing policy. The two big things that I think we learned coming out of that really jump-started this whole project were maybe it's three things. One is that we needed affordable housing options across the income spectrum, and that both the rental and homeowner options were going away quickly, and that they needed to be Atlanta specific, and that there are cities across the United States, and most cities across the US that are growing in population like Atlanta are dealing with similar challenges of housing affordability. And there was we heard lots of feedback that we don't want just cookie cutter policies that every other city is doing, but we need Atlanta specific policies that really work for this city and the unique design characteristics of Atlanta. And so that really set us on a 2-year-long process of doing research on the history of Atlanta's housing policy, the last 100 years in particular, and how we got here. And the reason we did that is that we believe strongly that we can't come up with we can't come up with policy solutions that work and propose them if we don't understand how we got here and the particular policy decisions that were made that are creating these challenges. And so that work, we did a lot of work on that, and that's what we'll talk a bit about today. And then as ramping up kind of the second round of public engagement, in October of this past year, we held a book club on Richard Rothstein's book, The Color of Law, which traces kind of the history of government segregation through housing policy in U.S. cities, and with a focus on particularly the ways in which the government played a role in segregating Atlanta, both local government and federal government. And then this particular project was released in December of this year. And so now we're in a phase kind of through the winter of 21, doing a lot of public engagement, meetings like this, getting feedback on the work and where we go from here. So this is a photo from back in 2018. And then here's a pic from The Color of Law when we did book giveaway for part of the book club. So the project itself, if you have not had a chance to check it out, it uses a platform called Esri Story Maps. And the reason we really like this platform is it provides a type of kind of interactive engagement that often gets missed in these types of reports and projects. And we really were intentional in trying to write it in a way that was approachable for folks who maybe have never spent any time in the housing policy space or otherwise, and wanted to make it something that that really the residents of the city could consume and engage with in a tactile way. Two guiding documents that I'll mention for this work that were really foundational for us. One is the One Atlanta Housing Affordability Action Plan. This was released under the Bottoms administration in 2019. And this plan outlines action items around housing affordability across all the public agencies in the city. And so from Invest Atlanta and the Beltline to city departments like planning, how we collectively move forward for a more affordable Atlanta and kind of make immediate progress in that way. A lot of the items that are the Department of City Planning's items that are listed in here are really focused on the design of the city and the way in which design plays a substantial role in affordability, sustainability, and more inclusive neighborhoods. The other piece, and really tied to the idea of the design of the city and the role that plays, is the Atlanta City Design. And this is a document that was adopted into the city's charter in 2017. and is a sort of long-term planning document. It looks all the way back to the city's origins in the 1800s, and then forward for the next generation of Atlanta, and asks the kind of basic question of what city do we want to become, and how do we help Atlanta to become the best version of itself? And it's really focused on the basic design of the city and the way in which design can be done for inclusive or exclusive ways. And so these two documents play a real foundational role for this work. One of the core variables that has triggered for Atlanta this entire conversation around affordability has been the population growth the city has seen. From 1970 until around 2010, the city saw little to no population growth and actually had several years of population decline since the 1970s. And so that, in many ways, allowed the city to be an affordable city due to the lack of demand, because the city had shrunk in size and changed a bit of the market dynamics. But coming out of the recession in 2010, the city started seeing large population growth and has grown now from around 420,000 residents in 2010 to over 500,000 residents as of 2019. And this marks the highest population in the city's history. Its previous high around 1970 was in the 490s. And so now the city has its largest population growth, our largest population in its history, after decades of real population stagnation. And we think that this is only going to continue. Our expected growth is to somewhere around 1.2 million by 2050. So that's more than double what we are today. At the same time, nearly 60% of the city's land is exclusionarily zoned for single-family housing. And by this, we mean you can't really build anything other than a single-family detached structure on them. And when you have population growth at the same time as this land use, it begins to create pressure in the housing market. For comparison, Atlanta is the 316th most densely populated city in the United States. There are quite a few cities kind of here behind you that I know I was surprised when I took a run through this list to see where Atlanta stacks up compared to other US cities. So this creates a bit of a housing supply problem. We have an inelastic housing supply, in large part due to the land use that we have in the city. And it's driving up the cost of housing faster than it would if there were enough supply to meet the demand. And so population growth and restrictive land use are hitting at it in a way that are driving up the cost very fast in Atlanta. In the last decade, we've seen a 50% increase in the median home sale price in the city. So how did we get here? The first thing that we learned when we started looking at our history was that Atlanta wasn't always the 316th most densely populated city in the United States, that we actually used to be much more dense. In 1940, the city had a population density of around 8,500 people per square mile. But by 2018, that number had reduced down to around 3,500 people per square mile, less than half of the population density of the city in 1940. So once we learned that, we started asking the question of well, what conditions existed in 1940 that were different today that allowed for the level of population density increase that we see. One last note on this actually that I forgot. So if the city were to grow to 1.2 million residents with the size, the current boundaries that it has, we would have a population density of around 8,500 people per square mile, just to give you a little bit of context there. So when we started looking at the zoning code and the role that played in the density allowed in the city by 1940, we learned that, well, there were several zoning codes that were attempted in the 19 teens and 20s, but they were overturned by the Supreme Court, both by the state and federal Supreme Court multiple times. Atlanta attempted to do what's called racial zoning and have racially explicit language in their zoning code. And so the zoning code was on R1 white and R2 black in the city's, actually I think it was R2 colored, apologies for that. And so that got struck down by the Georgia Supreme Court because the federal Supreme Court had struck it down. So by 1929, the city gave up on its attempt to do racialized zoning and moved to an economic exclusion and really kind of shifted its exclusionary practices. And this is the first time in the city's history where apartment buildings and single family detached and two family detached structures begin to be separated through the zoning code. And this is upheld by the Supreme Court and allowed to stay in place. The variance between the apartment dwellings and the regular dwelling houses here they mirrored almost exactly the racialized zoning code tried in previous years. And it was in large part used as a proxy for racial segregation through economic segregation. The other thing that I'll note in the 29 zoning code is that two-family units were allowed by right, and single family had not come to predominate the market as much at this point. But by 1930, in the early 1930s, the redlining that comes out through both the Federal Home Administration and the Homeowners Loan Corporation to federal programs and agencies under the New Deal. A new way of using federally backed mortgages comes into play as a wealth creation tool for many Americans. But Black and brown Americans are cut out of that very explicitly in the code. And what is created when this happens is a wealth creation tool in areas that were newly zoned single family housing, oftentimes with deed restriction requirements, or at least advisable to restrict it to only white residents at the time. And this is where the federal government starts playing a role in reinforcing this idea of racial segregation, and then only creating a tool that works for the white residents in single family neighborhoods. At the same time, funding is cut off, and the ability to access this new wealth creation tool is cut off from the apartment areas in the city, from the zoning code, and this has a disproportionately negative impact on the Black residents of Atlanta, and begins to create a level of economic desperation by denying access to this wealth creation tool. So this sets up diverging paths that nearly a century later, we're still seeing the impact of today. The red areas here are the areas that were redlined in the 1930s in the city of Atlanta. The ones that are grayed out here are either still low income areas today or have been completely destroyed and no longer exist. And for example, I mean, you can see like this neighborhood here where 85 cuts right through it, or the other neighborhoods, and you can see even how the freeway is cut through in the way that a lot of the neighborhoods have been completely destroyed. Today, 86% of the redline areas in the 1930s have either been destroyed or remain predominantly low income. The stadium neighborhoods near Summer Hill and where the Fulton County Stadium and now Turner Field, they were completely destroyed as part of this. And what happened in many ways is that the redlining gave way to another federal tool called urban renewal. And urban renewal was a federal tool to call something a slum or say it was blighted, and then use federal funds to condemn the land and clear it, which literally destroyed entire neighborhoods. And then freeway projects, which were also federally subsidized, did the same. They carved up neighborhoods. They destroyed many Black neighborhoods in the city, and also served as border lines and different ways to carve up the city, and physically impacting the way that the city operated. At the same time, the areas that were given federally backed mortgages that incurred deed restrictions against Black residents were allowed to prosper and thrive, and protected for decade after decade, creating kind of generational wealth in the city. Fast forward to today, Atlanta ranks near the very top, and sometimes ends up #1 on the list of cities with the highest income inequality in the United States. And if you look at demographic maps in the city, you can see how deeply segregated the city is by race, and the socioeconomic factors that are at play because of decades of discriminatory practices that impacted the Black residents of Atlanta. that are still in many ways impacting the city today. So this is looking at the most recent census data across median household income and home price per square foot in the city. So where do we go from here? And what are some policies that we can do to directly address the ways in which the zoning code has been used to segregate the city by race and class, and other housing policy tools that can proactively look toward making Atlanta work better today than it does, better in the future than it does today, and in a more inclusive city that allows residents across all income levels to be able to afford Atlanta. So back to the point I made earlier around Atlanta-specific tools for Atlanta-specific problems. We wanted to look at the design and the unique built environment that is Atlanta now, and ask the question of how do we become a more inclusive city from where we are today. And so we broke the kind of design-related ideas based in two areas. One is the city design growth areas, which are these areas here that you'll see on the screen. These are your urban core, like downtown and midtown, clusters like Buckhead and even Greenbrier Mall, and then corridors like Memorial Drive and Metropolitan. And these areas of the city, we believe, have the highest capacity for higher density growth. And as we think about growing and doubling in population, I think this is the area of the city that should carry the lion's share of that growth. It has the highest potential to access transit and job centers and important resources for a growing population. At the same time, there's a large portion of the city that we call conservation areas. And this is where most of the tree canopy is in Atlanta. This is where the majority of the single family type neighborhoods are in the city. And we believe that these areas of the city should largely stay and look and feel quite like they do today. We also think, though, that these areas need to embrace subtle, gentle change that allows for kind of nuanced growth. Not growth like you'll see in a growth area, not large apartments, but small ways that the conservation areas can contribute to a growing city, and ways that we think that will also benefit these neighborhoods as well as the city grows. So two types of categories of proposals that we'll talk through. The first is to stimulate the development of what we're calling naturally occurring affordable housing. And these are solutions that are market-based. They don't include necessarily any government subsidy to them, but are really an effort to create a healthy housing ecosystem where there are options across income levels and options that, by nature of the type of unit that they tend to be a more affordable option. And we think this is a really important part of the affordable housing equation in the city, because moderately priced housing is increasingly a dying breed in Atlanta right now. And so if we don't create moderately priced housing, and we only create luxury housing and subsidized housing, then those that can only afford the moderately priced housing will continue to cannibalize the more affordable options in the city. And we think that's a negative outcome for Atlanta, and that we want to be able to be a home for people across the income spectrum and not just the wealthiest residents or those that live in subsidized units. And so this is where a lot of our focus is tonight. So the first thing, and this is in conservation areas of the city, is that we propose to end the exclusionary single family zoning that exists right now in Atlanta, but do so in a very subtle way. And that's by allowing an additional dwelling unit on these properties citywide. And to take the example of the photo here, we're proposing that you would allow a single family home like this orange one to be able to convert its basement garage into a basement apartment unit, that both you could allow kind of attached accessory units and detached accessory units. And this follows a lot of what was allowed even in kind of the early zoning codes of Atlanta prior to the 1960s and 70s that allowed secondary units to live here. The reason that we're proposing these specifically is that it would honor the detached single-family structures of neighborhoods, but allow kind of nuanced ability to add new units that would be beneficial both for the homeowners and the resident, the rental units alike. And that the homeowner then would have more flexibility with their property if they have say, an aging parent that they want to be able to live close by but have their own independent space, or the ability to generate new revenue from being able to rent their basement or an addition on the back of their house out. By nature, to the point I was making earlier, that these types of units tend to be more affordable, right? If the single family house it costs a certain amount in neighborhood, the basement apartment in that single family house tends to be a cheaper option. So by allowing this, you're also creating a more moderately priced unit than currently exists in the neighborhood. Here's another example of one. This is where the second unit is up on the top floor of the structure. And this situation, the second unit is recessed back toward the back of the property. And this is a newer construction. And these are all examples from Atlanta. So the last one I'll show you on this is a basement apartment situation on a corner lot. The primary unit is up on the top floor, and then on the side, you have an entrance to the basement apartment unit. So these tend to take over like portions of an existing structure, and do so in ways that still fit the single family aesthetic of most neighborhoods in the city. We predict that around 11,500 new units could be created if just 15% of the city's single family properties added a second unit. One other way to address the accessory unit or additional unit is through something called accessory dwelling units. And accessory dwelling units is something the city has expanded in recent years that allowed in R4, R4, and R4, R4A, and R5 zoning districts, which is about half of the city's single family zoning districts. These are detached structures in the backyard and can be up to 750 square feet. We're proposing a couple of things to make these work better. You know, we allowed it in 2018, but have seen relatively limited adoption of it. And so there are a few things that we are hoping to do to make this work better. And one of them is to make the financing of these units easier to come by, because we found that more moderate income homeowners have had issues getting access to capital to build these. And so what we're proposing with ADUs is that you could do what's called a fee simple subdivision and then actually sell your ADU separate from the primary structure. It would still have all of the rules of an ADU, the size restrictions that must be in the backyard, but it would be able to be sold directly to a new homeowner. And this would allow the primary dwelling unit owner to be able to collateralize their property and get traditional financing to build the ADU. It'd also give them the flexibility if they would like to sell it off to be able to generate kind of quick revenue and income off of their backyard by doing so. At the same time, the new homeowner that's buying the ADU now has access to a brand new ownership opportunity that doesn't currently exist in Atlanta. That's more affordable by nature of it because of its size, because of its location in the back behind primary structures. It's going to be a more affordable option, and it's often difficult to create affordable ownership options, especially in a market-based way. And so we think could be a really creative way to benefit both the homeowner, the primary unit homeowner, and create home ownership opportunities through ADUs while making all of it much easier to finance than it currently is. We're also proposing that we expand this to all the single family areas in the city. The magenta color areas that you see on your screen currently do not allow ADUs, and we're proposing expanding them to these areas. One other housing type that we're looking to expand in the city is small apartment buildings. This is a picture of one from the Virginia Highland neighborhood in Atlanta. And these were predominant prior to the 1929 zoning code in a lot of the city's single family areas and two family areas. And then even after that, in the areas that did allow apartments, your 4, 6, 8, even 10 unit apartment buildings, these existed in nuanced ways near single family housing and had kind of a characteristic that was subtle enough to be a work in certain ways. It also tended to be a more affordable option again than the single family homes that also existed in the neighborhood. We're proposing that these be allowed by right within a half mile of the city's heavy rail MARTA stations. And these areas of the city, the reason that we're proposing this is that as the city grows and doubles in population, building on top of the heavy rail train stations we have will take pressure off of the car infrastructure and the traffic that Atlanta is famous for, and help to create also opportunities for car-free lifestyles and kind of cut the cost of car ownership for residents looking to live in these apartment buildings. Another proposal included in this is to remove residential parking requirements in the zoning code. So the zoning code has what are called parking minimums, and these minimum requirements lay out, whether it's a single family home or a large apartment building, how many parking spaces must be allocated per individual unit. And particularly for large apartment buildings, this can be very cost prohibitive, and that cost often gets relayed then onto the renter. For example, for a kind of a concrete structured parking garage in a new apartment building, estimates $25,000 to $40,000 per parking space to build one of these structures. That cost then, if you run that down, ends up being somewhere between $125 and $150 a month for a dwelling unit. So that ends up adding $100 to $150 a month into the rent for someone to live in that building, and that's currently required under the zoning code. So we're proposing to remove that requirement. We also want to look at the growth areas and ways we can increase density in ways that make sense here so that we can grow appropriately in the growth areas. So these are some properties that we've identified as low density and most single family. And so we want to look at these and see in cases that we can proactively rezone these to allow the level of density that would be more appropriate there. We also want to invest in a housing innovation lab and really work with homeowners and builders and anyone that's looking to kind of invest in kind of new housing in their neighborhood, to look at the ways in which these can be done in subtle ways that honor the character of a block and of a neighborhood, but allow smaller units and subtle ways to increase density that still respect the neighborhood character. So the other category of options is really to think around the increase of development of dedicated affordable housing citywide, and then where that goes. And by dedicated affordable housing, mean housing that's required to be affordable at different levels of income. So that requirement typically comes in two forms. One, through regulatory rules like inclusionary zoning that says if you're located here, you have to include X amount of affordable housing units for X number of years because of your proximity to the Beltline. The other happens through subsidy, right? If you get some kind of, let's say it's a tax abatement or otherwise some kind of funding, then because you receive this kind of public funding, then you are required to include a certain amount of affordability in your unit for, let's say 20 years. So one way we want to move forward with this is to develop publicly owned vacant land for affordable housing. The city and other public agencies own a lot of vacant land in the city. And we believe that developing this land, for instance, like this lot on Trinity Avenue downtown for affordable housing is an important part of the city's strategy to create dedicated affordable housing, particularly in high growth areas like downtown. We're also proposing to create an affordability district near the West Side Quarry Park. And this is in many ways serves kind of as an extension to what inclusionary zoning is doing near the Beltline, or it functions very similarly. The West Side Park is, just to kind of orient you, is this green blob right here. And this is the Grove Park and Rockdale neighborhoods right here, and Center Hill and Cary Park and Almond Park. The Beltline, the Quarry Park is a Beltline park, but it's on the far western edge of that. And so the public impact of that park and the impact of that public investment is moved further westward than the Beltline normally would. And so we're proposing to create this affordability district to ensure that new development that happens as a result of the major public investment will include kind of required affordability, and it would include it for both rental and for sale developments that come into the area. And we think that, the best practice for this type of kind of affordability requirement moving forward is that when there's a large public investment, that this kind of affordability requirement comes along with large public investments to ensure that affordability is available near public benefits. One other goal that we have from this project is to begin using our incentives and aligning our incentives to ensure that there's an equitable distribution of the affordable housing that we have in the city. And so in order to assess that and look at how do we create goals for that and begin aligning our strategies for that, we looked at the city's 9 high school clusters that you can see here on the bottom left. And then in order to ensure that we thought about both conservation and growth areas within those clusters, we weighted those clusters by the percentage of growth area that exists inside them. And so this is how that map looks. And again, it's weighted, the 9 high school clusters weighted by the growth areas in them. And the reason that we weighted them that way is because we believe that the growth areas are where a lot of the dedicated affordable housing, large multifamily structures ought to be built, because they're closer to amenities, resources, jobs, fresh food access, transit. They also have the highest capacity to take on large apartment buildings. And so this tool, we believe, will help us to create, align our different kind of incentives and subsidies and regulatory tools to develop affordable housing in the places that make the most sense as the city grows. One particular tool that we are currently working on right now to see this happen in is a tool called the Urban Enterprise Zone. And this is an old tax abatement tool for the 1980s that was designed originally for economic development and later included housing. Currently, this tool can only be used in the magenta areas that you see on your map. And the reason for that is the tool was originally designed for economic development in areas that were seeing some level of economic distress. We believe that for affordable housing, that we should be able to use this tool citywide and particularly focus it on the city's growth areas. And so we're proposing that we expand the use of this tool to be able to use it for affordable housing throughout the city so that we can have a more equitable distribution of our dedicated affordable housing. And I'll finish with this quote. It's really guided a lot of the work we're doing, but the cities have the capacity to provide something for everybody only because and only when they are created for everybody. And a lot of the work we've done here and the thoughts we put into this are really around this idea of how do we make Atlanta work better for everybody that wants to call this city home. So I will, share this again at the end, but we're going to jump into breakout session, so I won't do that here. So I will stop sharing my screen. And I'll set up our breakout sessions. So we have 4 breakout sessions, and you'll have, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Sonia or someone else, but I believe you'll have the choice to pick which breakout session you're going to be in. The 4 options we have, and really again, the goal for these sessions is going to be to talk through the particular policies that I mentioned here, and just kind of get your feedback on them as we work through this. I'm getting a question for what was that email address. It's housing@atlantagA.gov. I'll type it in the chat. The four that we have is that first one is around dedicated affordable housing and particularly our policies for public vacant land development, the urban enterprise zone, and then the dedicated affordable housing equitably distributed throughout the city. We're also going to have one around parking requirements and the proposal to remove parking minimums throughout the city. We have one around small apartments near transit. And then we have one around the additional dwelling unit and the expansion of the ADU, accessory dwelling unit program. And so I don't know how we do this, Leah, maybe as far as like letting people select, but we can jump on right when, looks like.
So I've opened up the
There's a way
rooms
to
for
do this.
everyone.
Okay.
And what you can do is decide which room that you would like to participate in a small group discussion in.
All right. Thanks, Sonia. And we'll do this for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we will come back out and you get to pick another group. All right, thanks so much, everyone. So we're going to do one more round of these. I encourage you to pick another one than the one you picked the first time, and we can talk through your questions. So Sonia, if you want to just go ahead and pull back up that that group and let folks pick their second breakout group.
You'll see the rooms in just 1 second.
Cool, thank you. Hey everyone, thanks so much for doing the breakout sessions. I had a really good time talking with all of you. I thought it was really helpful feedback. What I want to do now to wrap up is give each of the group facilitators a chance to report out on just some general thoughts or feedback that they received in those sessions, and then we will wrap up and let you get on with your evening. Carolina, you want to go first and talk about your group?
Sure, Josh. Good evening, everyone. My name is Carolina Rodriguez. I'm a project manager with our Office of Housing and Community Development, and I facilitated the discussion in the breakout room around the Urban Enterprise Zone program and using public lands for affordable housing. And so a huge thank you to all of the participants for your thoughtful comments and questions. I took lots and lots of notes, so thank you. Some of the themes that emerged, are, positive support, especially for activating underused public lands in support of some of these goals, tempered with some concerns as far as, how quickly are we able to get these programs off the ground? Are we going to be able to navigate some of the tricky tribal ownership of public lands among the different owners? But overall, very supportive of activating public lands. So when it comes to the UEZ program, a mix as far as support in terms of, targeting for certain types of businesses and affordable housing in certain areas, but definitely concern, about the use of tax incentives and subsidies, across the city. And so, how does the UEZ program kind of fit into that was a concern. Let's see. And then just wonderful, comments and questions around how do we measure affordable housing? What does that mean? And, how do we address kind of the continuum of housing needs from, homelessness and needing shelter all the way through, full ownership. So, and everything in the middle. So that was, those were the themes in our group.
Great, thanks so much, Carolina. Kendra, you want to go next? You're on mute.
So I was with the group that was talking about small apartments by right near transit. And some of the kind of positive feedback we got was that there's a real opportunity to work with the design studio to show how kind of wonderful these small buildings can be from a kind of design perspective. Also kind of big picture, there's a real opportunity to cut back on traffic and congestion in the city, which would really enhance quality of life. But we also heard that, maybe this really isn't ambitious enough. Are we thinking big enough with this policy? Should we be thinking about transportation corridors rather than just transportation stations? And finally, thinking about those half-mile buffers around the stations, just because you live within a half mile of the station doesn't mean you can actually walk there. There's infrastructure needed, and kind of bigger picture, what will this increased density mean for infrastructure? So a lot of great feedback, and I appreciate all the feedback.
Great, thanks so much, Kendra. Sonia, you want to go with your group?
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Sonia Sequeira, and I'm a community engagement manager with the department. And one thing I wanted to note is if you have a group or organization that would be good to have a discussion with, you can fill out a presentation request and we will try our best to accommodate it to do something similar. And I'll put my email and the link for that in the chat. So my group talked about eliminating parking minimums citywide. And overall, there's a lot of interest in it, especially how those cost savings could be passed down to residents and creating just more density within the city. Overall, there were some concerns about Atlanta's reliance on the car and people being used to being able to park where they would like to, and really what that means for commercial districts. if we were to introduce this citywide, if that would kind of open the floodgates and create a lot of congestion on residential streets.
All right, thanks so much, Sonia. I appreciate that. And I'll do a quick report out for ours. Our groups talked about changes to the single-family zoning areas of the city, both with attached dwelling units and detached dwelling units, and proposals around that. The general feedback we got was there was a decent amount of interest in kind of allowing this flexibility, both for expanding it in areas of the city that don't allow detached additional dwelling units right now, and then also desire to be able to convert existing structures into additional dwelling units. And so I think that there was the kind of the general idea was that, you know, there's some details that we need to talk through as far as kind of how do we make that work best throughout the city, and kind of the size and ensuring that it fits the fabric of individual neighborhoods. The concern that, you know, I think that there was concerns about, like, what does this exactly look like, and kind of, you know, how is this like a duplex, or is this different in its size and structure, and what does the attached dwelling unit kind of function like on a given property, and kind of ensuring that we're still honoring the single family development pattern of the neighborhoods. And then I think the other concern I'll mention that was brought up toward the end of our last session, I think it's an important one for us, is considering how these tools, how we can kind of assess and really ensure that the tools that we're proposing and the particular zoning changes that we're proposing, I think to directly address the racial inequality that we started the conversation with during the presentation, and the ways in which the zoning code has been used to segregate by race and by class in the city, and how to, as we look at making changes, ensure that those changes are designed to benefit legacy residents of the city and residents that may have the most limited access to capital. So there was a lot of talk about different programs, financing programs, to ensure that the residents that would like to and have the opportunity to benefit financially from this change have programs designed for them in order to do so. And so that's the main feedback that we received in our two groups on that. I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. I know we're a little over what our time was, but it was valuable conversation and feedback from us, and I think that these are the kinds of sessions that help us really shape the actual legislation related to these proposals, and ensure that they work better and work in a way that you know, kind of play a role in forming. And so thank you all very much for making time out of your lives to talk with us about this tonight. If you have any other questions or follow-up, I'll also drop my email address in here. Actually, I may have done it earlier, but I'll do it again. Feel free to reach out to me or anyone else on our team. We would be happy to talk with you, or as Sonia mentioned, if there is a group that you think would benefit from a longer conversation about any of these topics, we'd be more than happy to meet with all of you. So we'll wrap there, and thank you all for this evening. Leah, do you have any final words for us for MPU before we wrap up?
So Leah's off right now, so I'll
Samantha.
go ahead and jump in. I want to thank everyone for participating in this course. Awesome kickoff to our classes. I'm actually about to put on the screen the remaining courses that we have coming up. But first, I would like to thank the Office of Housing and Community Development for hosting this class. Thank you guys so much. Upcoming courses that we have that we would love for you all to take advantage of. We have our Community Leadership Institute, which actually we'll be selecting those participants today. So that class is actually, you can't register for that. But then we have our WB 1003 course, Parliamentary Procedures, which is February 25th. We have about 25 seats left for that one. We have our WB 1019, MPU 101, which is March 11th, and then our WB 1004.001, Zoning Fundamentals 1, which is March 16th, and our WB 1008 Neighborhood Planning Series, Urban Plan Academy, which is March 26th. If you would like to register for any of these classes, please visit www.npuatlanta.org. And if you would like to follow us, please feel free to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at NPU Atlanta. And then on Nextdoor, which is where we update a lot of things about NPU meetings and our courses and just things in general going on. City of Atlanta neighborhood planning units. So with that being said, thank you all. Thank you all for participating, and have a good night, I guess. Bye, everybody.